Welcome to the Unseen Shelf. Today, we will explore Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed by Jared Diamond. In this gripping exploration of history, we journey through the rise and fall of civilizations, uncovering the forces that have shaped their destinies. From the ruins of Easter Island to the vanished Norse settlements of Greenland, Diamond investigates how environmental challenges, political choices, and cultural blind spots have determined the survival or collapse of societies. What lessons can we learn from their fates? Are we repeating the mistakes of the past? As we delve into these gripping case studies, we may find unsettling parallels to our own world. Join us as we uncover the warnings history has left behind and what they mean for our future. Now, let's begin the story. Part 1 of Collapse, titled Modern Societies, focuses on Montana as a case study, illustrating how environmental challenges, economic factors, and societal decisions interact in a contemporary setting, setting the stage for understanding past and present societal collapses. Let's get into Chapter 1. Under Montana's Big Sky examines how environmental issues such as soil degradation, deforestation, water shortages, and climate change, combined with economic and political challenges, impact modern Montana, serving as a microcosm of broader societal vulnerabilities. Montana's vast sky stretches over rolling pastures and rugged mountains, a land that once promised endless opportunity. Ranchers, farmers, and miners came seeking prosperity, but the land has suffered under human ambition. Overgrazing has thinned the grasslands, erosion carves into the soil, and the once fertile fields struggle against drought and unpredictable weather. Farmers fight to sustain their crops, but the land grows weary. The forests tell a similar tale. Once dense with towering pines, they have been thinned by logging, leaving behind weaker, disease-prone trees. Wildfires, once a natural force, now rage with increasing intensity, threatening homes and livelihoods. Beneath the surface, the scars of mining remain, abandoned shafts leaking heavy metals into rivers, poisoning water, and staining the land with waste. Yet Montanans endure. Some ranchers rotate pastures, hoping to heal the land. Farmers experiment with sustainable methods. Conservationists work to protect the forests, and efforts to clean the mines continue, though slowly. The struggle is clear. Can Montana adapt before it is too late? This state is a microcosm of a larger reality. Throughout history, societies have faced similar environmental and economic challenges. Some have found solutions, while others have collapsed. Montana's fate serves as both a warning and a question, one that echoes through time. Part 2 of Collapse, titled Past Societies, examines historical civilizations including Easter Island, the Anasazi, the Maya, Norse Greenland, and others that thrived and then collapsed, revealing how environmental mismanagement, climate change, and societal choices determine their fates. Let's get into Chapter 2, Twilight at Easter. Far out in the Pacific, beyond any sight of a mainland, lies Easter Island, a place of mystery and warning. When Polynesian settlers first arrived centuries ago, they found an untouched paradise. Thick forests of towering palms cover the land, birds fill the sky, and the surrounding ocean provided fish in abundance. Here, these settlers flourished, creating an advanced society known for its most striking legacy, the massive stone statues, the moai, carved in honor of their ancestors. But their success carried the seeds of their downfall. As the population grew, so did its demands. Trees were cut to clear land, build canoes, and transport the moai. Year by year, the forest thinned. At first, the loss seemed manageable, but as generations passed, the consequences became irreversible. Without trees, the soil eroded, crop yields declined, and the people faced growing hunger. Birds, once plentiful, disappeared, either hunted to extinction or left without nesting places. The loss of trees also meant no more canoes, cutting off access to deep-sea fishing. With food sources dwindling, desperation set in. Tensions erupted into conflict. Clans, once united in their devotion to building the moai, turned on one another. Warfare spread across the island, and in a symbolic collapse of their civilization, rival groups began toppling each other's statues. The great monuments that once stood proudly now lay face down in the earth, broken reminders of a shattered society. Starvation and violence consumed the people, reducing the population to a fraction of what it had been at its peak. When European explorers arrived in 1722, they found an island stripped bare, its people living in primitive conditions, cut off from their once prosperous past. Gone were the forests, the birds, the vast fishing fleets. The grandeur of Easter Island had faded into legend. Easter Island serves as more than an archaeological curiosity. It is a warning. The island's isolation meant its people had no escape, no outside help when resources ran out. Today, Earth itself is an island in the vastness of space. Our forests, our oceans, our fragile environment, they are not infinite. The fate of Easter Island is a lesson etched in stone, one that asks us, will we repeat its mistakes? The Last People Alive, the Pitcairn and Henderson Islands, Chapter 3 explores how the once thriving Polynesian society on these remote islands collapsed due to deforestation, resource depletion, and the breakdown of essential trade networks, ultimately leading to their abandonment. The Polynesians who first settled these islands were master navigators, skilled in reading the ocean's currents, the stars, and the changing winds. They arrived in sturdy double-hulled canoes, bringing with them the plants and animals they would need to survive. At first, life on these islands was abundant. Pitcairn, though rugged, provided fertile soil for crops. Henderson, with its dense seabird colonies and rich marine life, offered an endless supply of food. Together with Mangariva, a larger island to the west, these islands formed a trade network, each relying on the others for essential goods. But isolation came at a cost. As populations grew, so did the pressure on resources. Pitcairn's forests were gradually cut down for canoes and firewood. Henderson, despite its rich bird life, had no fresh water and no soil for farming, making it dependent on the other islands for survival. Over time, the balance shifted. Deforestation on Pitcairn made boat building impossible, cutting off vital trade routes. Without access to stone tools from Mangariva or fresh crops from Pitcairn, Henderson's people were stranded, their lifeline severed. As food shortages worsened, tensions likely erupted. Evidence suggests violent struggles, perhaps even cannibalism in the desperate final days. The people of Pitcairn and Henderson, once connected to a larger world, found themselves trapped in a shrinking, failing ecosystem. One by one, their settlements fell silent. When European sailors arrived centuries later, they found only abandoned sites, scattered tools, and remnants of a people who had vanished without a trace. The once thriving island network had collapsed, leaving behind nothing but the whispers of the past carried on the ocean breeze. The story of Pitcairn and Henderson is one of fragility, how even the most skilled and resourceful societies can fall when cut off from the outside world. Their fate is a stark reminder that no civilization, no matter how advanced, is immune to the consequences of environmental mismanagement and resource depletion. As history has shown time and time again, the forces that shape our survival remain the same, whether on an isolated Pacific island or in our interconnected modern world. The Ancient Ones, the Anasazi and their neighbors, Chapter 4 examines the rise and fall of the Anasazi civilization in the American Southwest, revealing how climate change, deforestation, soil depletion, and social upheaval led to their mysterious abandonment of once thriving settlements. The canyons of the American Southwest are dry and desolate now, their sandstone cliffs standing silent over the ruins of a vanished civilization. Yet centuries ago, this land was alive with the voices of the Anasazi, the Ancient Ones, who built vast cities in the cliffs and canyons, mastering the art of survival in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. From the towering great houses of Chaco Canyon to the hidden dwellings of Mesa Verde, they constructed an intricate society, thriving against the odds. But in time, their world unraveled. The people vanished, leaving behind empty homes, abandoned fields, and a mystery that lingers to this day. The Anasazi were skilled engineers, building complex settlements of multi-story stone dwellings, ceremonial kivas, and vast road networks that connected distant villages. They farmed the arid land, cultivating maize, beans, and squash, and developed intricate irrigation techniques to capture and store precious rainwater. For centuries, their society flourished, expanding trade routes that stretch across the Southwest, bringing turquoise, pottery, and exotic goods from faraway lands. Yet, even the most advanced societies are bound by the limits of their environment. As the population grew, the demand for resources intensified. Trees were cut down to build homes and fuel fires, leading to deforestation. Without tree cover, soil erosion increased, making farming more difficult. Then came the droughts, prolonged dry spells that turned fertile fields into dust. The once reliable water sources dwindled and crops failed. With hunger came conflict. Evidence of warfare and violence suggests that desperate communities turned on one another, raiding food supplies and fortifying their settlements. Some villages were burned, their inhabitants possibly massacred or forced to flee. Social order collapsed, and a once thriving civilization began to disintegrate. By the late 13th century, the great cities of the Anasazi stood empty. The people had abandoned their homes, migrating southward, possibly integrating into other Native American tribes. The towering structures of Chaco Canyon and Mesa Verde were left to the wind and sand, their builders gone without a trace. The fall of the Anasazi is a story of resilience and fragility, how even a sophisticated society can collapse when environmental pressures outpace the ability to adapt. Their fate is a cautionary tale, a reminder that human survival depends not just on ingenuity, but on respecting the delicate balance of the world around us. The Maya collapse. Chapter 5 explores how the once mighty Maya civilization, known for its advanced cities, writing system, and astronomy, fell into decline due to deforestation, prolonged drought, overpopulation, and internal warfare, leading to the abandonment of its great cities. Deep within the jungles of Central America, stone pyramids rise from the dense canopy, remnants of a civilization that once ruled this land with power and precision. The Maya, masters of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering, built vast cities, Tikal, Copan, Palenque, centers of culture, trade, and political power. For centuries, they flourished, constructing grand temples, recording their history in intricate glyphs, and charting the movements of the stars with astonishing accuracy. Yet, despite their brilliance, the Maya civilization did not endure. One by one, their cities fell silent, overtaken by the jungle, their people scattered, their decline a mystery that puzzled historians for centuries. At the height of their power, the Maya elite ruled over a complex society, sustained by an advanced agricultural system. They cultivated maize, beans, and squash, using terracing and irrigation to maximize their land's potential. Their rulers, considered divine intermediaries, built elaborate palaces and temples, celebrating victories and bloodletting rituals to appease the gods. But beneath this grandeur, cracks had begun to form. As the population grew, the demand for food and resources intensified. Forests were cleared to make way for more farmland, but the thin tropical soil was quickly exhausted. Deforestation led to soil erosion, making it harder to sustain crops. The Maya, dependent on seasonal rainfall, faced a deadly challenge when drought struck. With fewer trees to retain moisture and no permanent rivers in their heartlands, water became increasingly scarce. Crop failures led to hunger, and hunger led to unrest. As resources dwindled, tensions erupted into warfare. Rival city-states, once bound by trade and diplomacy, turned on each other in bloody conflicts. Kings waged war to secure resources, but battles only drained what little remained. Cities fell into chaos, their once thriving populations fleeing in search of food and security. Temples and palaces, once symbols of divine power, were abandoned, left to crumble under the weight of time. By the late 9th century, many of the great Maya cities in the southern lowlands were deserted. The jungle reclaimed their streets, covering their monuments in vines and silence. Though the Maya people survived, adapting and continuing their traditions in smaller communities, their civilization's golden age had ended. The fall of the Maya is a story of ambition and limits, how even the most advanced society can falter when it overuses its resources and fails to adapt to environmental change. Their fate stands as a haunting lesson for the modern world. Prosperity is fragile, and no civilization, no matter how great, is immune to the consequences of ecological and political collapse. Norse Greenland's End. Chapter 6 examines how the Norse settlements in Greenland, despite their initial success, ultimately collapsed due to climate change, deforestation, soil depletion, isolation, and their unwillingness to adapt to the Inuits' survival strategies in the harsh Arctic environment. The icy winds howled across the fjords of Greenland, sweeping over the remnants of a once thriving Norse settlement. For nearly 5 centuries, European farmers and traders had carved out a fragile existence in this unforgiving land, building stone churches, tending livestock, and maintaining a tenuous link to the outside world. Yet, as time passed, their world grew colder, their fields turned barren, and their communities vanished into history, leaving only abandoned ruins against the Arctic sky. When Eric the Red led Norse settlers to Greenland in the late 10th century, the land seemed harsh but promising. The fjords, though frigid, offered pastures for sheep and cattle. The settlers built sturdy homes from stone and turf, modeled after their Scandinavian homeland. They established two main settlements, the eastern and western settlements, growing to a population of several thousand at their peak. Trade routes connected them to Norway and Iceland, allowing them to export walrus ivory, sealskins, and wool in exchange for iron tools and essential supplies. For generations, they endured, their way of life a testament to resilience. But Greenland was never an easy place to live. The growing season was short, and the land yielded little beyond grass for grazing. Unlike in Iceland and in Norway, where fishing was a staple, the Norse in Greenland clung to their European customs, relying primarily on livestock and farming. This stubbornness would prove costly. As the population grew, so did the pressure on the land. Overgrazing led to soil depletion. Deforestation left the settlements exposed to harsh winds, and the once rich pastures became thin and unproductive. Then came the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that brought longer winters and shorter summers. The already fragile Norse settlements struggled to survive. Their livestock starved in the harsh winters, and their harvests failed. Trade with Europe, once vital for their survival, became infrequent as sea ice made voyages treacherous. Isolated and vulnerable, the Greenland Norse faced mounting challenges with no way to escape. Meanwhile, the Inuit thrived. Unlike the Norse, who resisted adapting to Greenland's harsher realities, the Inuit had mastered the Arctic, hunting seals and whales, using skin-covered kayaks, and building insulated dwellings that allowed them to survive the brutal winters. The Norse saw them as outsiders, perhaps even threats, rather than potential allies. Instead of adopting Inuit survival strategies, the Norse clung to their European traditions, even as their world collapsed around them. By the 15th century, the last Norse settlements were abandoned. Their churches, once filled with worshippers, stood empty. Their farms, once dotted with livestock, lay in ruins. What became of the final survivors remains a mystery. Did they perish from starvation? Were they forced to leave, sailing away into the unknown? Or did they succumb to disease and conflict? All that remained were the silent echoes of a society that had failed to adapt. The fall of Norse Greenland is a story of resilience met with stubbornness, of a people who clung to their traditions at the cost of their survival. Their fate serves as a stark reminder that no civilization, no matter how strong, can resist the forces of nature if it refuses to change. Adaptation is not just a skill, it is the key to survival. Chapter 7 is about opposite paths to success, compares the fates of the Norse settlers and the Inuit in Greenland, highlighting how the Norse failed to adapt to the Arctic environment, while the Inuit thrived by embracing flexible survival strategies, superior hunting techniques, and a deeper understanding of the land. The winds of Greenland carried two stories, one of struggle, the other of survival. The Norse, arriving from Europe, brought their traditions, their livestock, and their way of life, determined to carve a familiar existence into this harsh and unfamiliar land. The Inuit, arriving centuries later from the Arctic, came armed with knowledge passed down through generations, skills forged in ice and snow, an understanding of how to not just survive, but thrive in the extreme cold. One society would vanish, leaving behind only ruins. The other would endure, adapting to a land that showed no mercy. The Norse saw Greenland as an extension of their Scandinavian homeland, relying on cattle, sheep, and farming. They built stone and turf homes, erected churches, and created a society that mirrored European life as closely as possible. But Greenland was not Norway. The land was fragile, the growing season short, and the unpredictable climate made livestock a precarious food source. The Norse resisted change, refusing to eat marine mammals or fully embrace hunting, despite the sea teeming with seals and whales. To them, such practices were beneath their status, a sign of desperation. The Inuit, by contrast, were masters of adaptation. Unlike the Norse, they did not try to force the land to fit their way of life. Instead, they shaped their lives to fit the land. They built igloos in winter and sod houses in summer, designed to retain warmth in the bitter cold. They fashioned lightweight kayaks and umiaks, allowing them to navigate the icy waters with ease. Most importantly, they hunted efficiently, using harpoons and sled dogs to track seals, whales, and caribou. They wasted nothing. Their tools, clothing, and even fuel for their lamps came from the animals they hunted. While the Norse suffered during the Little Ice Age, the Inuit thrived. The worsening climate made farming impossible, but it had little effect on the Inuits' hunting-based lifestyle. Where the Norse saw starvation, the Inuits saw opportunity. As sea ice expanded, seal populations increased, and the Inuit followed, moving with the animals, never exhausting their resources. Their society was built on flexibility, on an intimate relationship with the environment, and on an ability to read the land in ways the Norse never could. The two civilizations coexisted for centuries, yet they remained largely separate. The Norse seemed to view the Inuit with a mix of curiosity and disdain, seeing them as primitive rather than as potential allies. While there is evidence of occasional trade, there is little to suggest that the Norse learned from their Arctic neighbors. Their pride, their commitment to tradition, and their reluctance to change sealed their fate. By the 15th century, the Norse Greenlanders had vanished. Their settlements stood empty, their livestock long dead, their last moments lost to time. The Inuit, however, remained, their way of life proving far more resilient than stone churches or European customs. The story of Norse and Inuit Greenland is a tale of survival, not just against nature, but against rigid thinking. One society refused to adapt and collapsed. The other embraced change and endured. The lesson is clear. To survive, a civilization must be willing to evolve. Angkor's Rise and Fall. Chapter 8 explores how the Khmer Empire's magnificent capital, Angkor, flourished through advanced water management but ultimately collapsed due to climate instability, deforestation, and an overextended infrastructure that failed to withstand prolonged droughts and monsoonal floods. Deep within the jungles of Southeast Asia, the ruins of Angkor whisper of a lost empire. Once the heart of the mighty Khmer civilization, Angkor stood as one of the greatest cities of its time, an architectural marvel of towering temples, intricate carvings, and sprawling reservoirs that sustain its people. At its peak in the 12th century, it was larger than any medieval European city, home to hundreds of thousands, ruled by powerful kings who saw themselves as divine. But like so many civilizations before it, Angkor fell. Its temples, once symbols of grandeur, were swallowed by the jungle, abandoned to time. The question is, why? Angkor's success lay in its mastery of water. The Khmer built an elaborate hydraulic system, an intricate network of canals, reservoirs, barrages, and moats that collected and distributed water across the land. In a region where the monsoons brought seasonal floods followed by months of drought, controlling water was the key to survival. These reservoirs turned Angkor into a year-round agricultural powerhouse, sustaining rice fields that could support an immense population. This water system, along with the empire's military strength and wealth from trade, allowed Angkor to flourish for centuries. Yet, beneath its splendor, cracks were forming. The empire's expansion strained its resources. More land was cleared for farming, leading to deforestation and soil degradation. The massive reservoirs, once a source of stability, became vulnerable to disruption. Then came the unpredictable swings of climate, devastating droughts followed by torrential floods. The very system that had sustained Angkor now turned against it. With prolonged droughts, reservoirs dried up, leaving crops to wither and people to starve. When the rains returned, they came with overwhelming force, eroding the land and damaging the canals that once controlled the water so precisely. The Khmer, once masters of their environment, found themselves at its mercy. Without reliable water, their society weakened. Political instability followed. The once powerful kings struggled to maintain control as rival factions vied for power. Internal conflicts drained resources, and Angkor's defenses weakened. As the empire faltered, outside enemies saw an opportunity. In the 15th century, the city was sacked by the Ayutthaya kingdom from present-day Thailand. Though some inhabitants remained, Angkor was never the same. The great capital was gradually abandoned, left to be reclaimed by the jungle. The fall of Angkor is a story of overextension, environmental strain, and the delicate balance between civilization and nature. The Khmer had built one of the most advanced water management systems of their time, but even their ingenuity could not withstand the forces of climate change and resource depletion. Today, Angkor stands as a silent warning, an empire that once commanded the land, undone by the very environment it sought to control. Japan Lessons from a Successful Rebound. Chapter 9 explores how medieval Japan, particularly during the Tokugawa era, avoided ecological collapse by implementing strict forest management, sustainable agricultural practices, and societal reforms, demonstrating that environmental decline is not inevitable if proactive measures are taken. In the misty forests of Japan, where towering cedar trees now stretch skyward, lies a story unlike the collapses of Easter Island, the Anasazi, or the Maya. This is a story not of failure, but of recovery. Japan, a land of limited natural resources and steep mountains, once faced the same dangers of deforestation, soil depletion, and ecological collapse that doomed so many civilizations before it. Yet, unlike them, Japan reversed its course. Through strict conservation, innovative governance, and cultural adaptation, it managed to pull itself back from the brink, a rare example of a society that chose survival. Centuries ago, Japan's population was growing, its cities expanding, and its forests vanishing at an alarming rate. Wood was the backbone of society, used for building homes, heating fires, constructing ships, and even making paper. With demand far exceeding supply, entire mountainsides were stripped bare, leading to soil erosion, declining agricultural productivity, and devastating floods. By the 1600s, Japan was on the path to ecological ruin. But then came the Tokugawa shogunate, a ruling dynasty that saw the warning signs and took deliberate action. Unlike the leaders of so many collapsed civilizations, they adapted. The government imposed strict restrictions on logging, requiring permits for tree cutting and enforcing reforestation programs. Samurai rulers began planting trees instead of just cutting them, and sustainable forestry became a state priority. Farmers, too, changed their practices. Rather than expanding into fragile lands, they focused on intensive farming techniques, crop rotation, organic fertilizers, and irrigation improvements that made existing farmland more productive. Villages developed communal forest management, ensuring that no single group could exploit resources beyond what nature could replenish. Over generations, Japan transformed from a nation on the edge of environmental collapse into one of the world's earliest examples of sustainable living. The forests regenerated. The rivers ran clear. The soil, once depleted, regained its fertility. By the 19th century, Japan's landscape had stabilized, proving that ecological decline is not inevitable. A society can choose to reverse its mistakes. Japan's story is a powerful lesson. Where others collapsed under their own weight, the Japanese showed that a civilization can see its limits and act before it's too late. The past is filled with warnings, but Japan offers something rarer, a beacon of hope, proving that with foresight, discipline, and adaptation, societies can not only survive but thrive. Chapter 10, The Tokopia Solution, explores how the small Polynesian island of Tokopia successfully avoided environmental collapse through strict population control, sustainable resource management, and cultural adaptation, demonstrating how a society can achieve long-term survival by making difficult but necessary choices. In the vast Pacific Ocean, where the horizon stretches endlessly, lies a tiny island, Tokopia. Barely 2 square miles in size, this speck of land should have long been overwhelmed by its own people, its resources exhausted, its forests stripped bare like so many other island civilizations before it. But unlike Easter Island or the Pitcairn settlements, Tokopia did not collapse. Instead, it thrived. The people of Tokopia made choices, deliberate, difficult, and sometimes harsh, that ensured their survival for over 1,000 years. Their story is not one of downfall, but of wisdom. The first Polynesians arrived on Tokopia centuries ago, bringing with them crops, animals, and traditions from their homeland. At first, like so many other societies, they expanded. They cleared land, fished the reefs, and built a thriving community. But Tokopia's isolation meant that mismanaging its resources could lead to disaster. The island had no room to grow, no outside trade routes to fall back on. The Tokopians understood this, and they acted before crisis could take hold. One of the most radical steps they took was controlling their population. While other civilizations collapsed under the weight of overpopulation, Tokopia deliberately limited its numbers. They practiced celibacy, abortion, and even infanticide when necessary to keep their population in balance with the island's resources. Occasionally, when the island's numbers grew too high, they even sent people out to sea on one-way voyages, acts of extreme but calculated sacrifice for the survival of the whole. Beyond population control, the Tokopians transformed their environment to make it sustainable. They stopped raising pigs, an unsustainable source of food that damaged the land, and shifted to a plant-based diet, relying on taro, yams, coconuts, and carefully managed fishing. They designed an agricultural system that mimicked a natural forest, layering crops to prevent soil erosion and maximize productivity. Unlike the deforested ruins of Easter Island, Tokopia remains green. But survival wasn't just about resources, it was about culture. The Tokopians developed strict social rules to ensure cooperation and long-term thinking. Chiefs held power but ruled with the people's approval, and disputes were settled to avoid destructive internal conflicts. Their traditions reinforced the idea that the island's well-being was more important than any individual's desires. Tecopia's success is astonishing. While so many other societies ignored warning signs until it was too late, Tecopia made hard choices early. Their story is proof that collapse is not inevitable, that a society, no matter how small, can survive if it is willing to adapt. Today, Tecopia remains inhabited, its forests intact, its people still living by the wisdom of their ancestors. In a world where many civilizations are repeating the mistakes of the past, Tecopia offers a rare lesson. Sustainability is possible, but only if we are willing to make sacrifices before it's too late. Introducing Part 3 of Collapse, which is titled Modern Societies, Problems and Solutions. Part 3 examines contemporary case studies, including Rwanda, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, China, and Australia, showing how modern nations face environmental and societal challenges similar to those of past civilizations, with some on the path to collapse and others finding ways to adapt and survive. Let's start with Chapter 11, Malthus in Africa, Rwanda's Tragedy. The hills of Rwanda, lush and green, seem at odds with the horror that unfolded there. To the outside world, the 1994 Rwandan genocide was a brutal ethnic conflict, a staggering moment of human cruelty. But beneath the politics, the hate, and the violence lay a deeper, more insidious force, one that had played a role in the collapse of societies for centuries: overpopulation and resource scarcity. For generations, Rwanda's fertile hills had sustained its people. But as its population soared, one of the highest densities in Africa, the land struggled to keep up. Farms, once plentiful, were divided and subdivided among families, shrinking to plots too small to feed a household. The forests were cut for firewood, soil erosion worsened, and food production fell. With no frontier to expand into and no resources left to claim, desperation took hold. Tensions simmered between the Hutu and Tutsi, groups with a long and complex history. But as food shortages worsened and economic hardship deepened, these old divisions turned deadly. Political manipulation fanned the flames, blaming one group for the suffering of the other. When the genocide began in April 1994, the killing was swift and ruthless. Within 100 days, nearly 1 million people were slaughtered. Neighbors turned on neighbors, communities wiped out in a frenzy of violence. The world saw the bloodshed, but few understood the role of ecological collapse in fueling the disaster. Rwanda was a Malthusian nightmare, a society where population growth had outstripped its resources, leaving people fighting over survival. Throughout history, similar patterns had emerged. When land and food became scarce, tensions erupted, often leading to war, mass displacement, or the downfall of entire civilizations. But Rwanda's story did not end in 1994. The country faced a choice: remain trapped in cycles of violence and resource scarcity, or rebuild. In the years that followed, Rwanda pursued aggressive reforms, reforestation projects, agricultural modernization, and population control programs aimed at preventing another catastrophe. The scars of the past remain, but Rwanda's efforts show that collapse is not inevitable. It can be reversed, but only with deliberate action. Rwanda stands as both a warning and a lesson. The genocide was not only a political crisis but an ecological one, revealing what happens when a society ignores the limits of its land. As the world's population grows and resources dwindle, the question looms: will we recognize these warning signs in time, or will we repeat history's darkest chapters? Chapter 12, One Island, Two Fates, Haiti and the Dominican Republic, contrasts the divergent environmental and economic paths of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, illustrating how deforestation, poor governance, and resource mismanagement led to Haiti's ecological and economic struggles, while better policies and conservation efforts helped the Dominican Republic avoid collapse. From the sky, the contrast is striking. On one side of the island, lush green forests stretch across the land. On the other, barren hills, stripped of trees, eroded and dry. This is Hispaniola, an island divided not just by a border, but by history, governance, and the choices of its people. Haiti and the Dominican Republic share the same land, the same climate, and once a similar colonial past. But today, one faces environmental collapse and poverty, while the other has managed to preserve its forests and sustain its economy. Haiti, on the western side, was once covered in forests. But over centuries, trees were felled for plantations, fuel, and later survival. Without forests to hold the soil, erosion stripped the land bare. Rivers dried up, farmlands failed, and hunger spread. Even now, over 98% of Haiti's forests are gone, leaving a nation trapped in a cycle of poverty and environmental decline. The Dominican Republic, on the eastern side, faced similar pressures. Yet, its leaders took a different path. In the 20th century, recognizing the dangers of deforestation, the government enacted strict conservation policies. Logging was banned, forests were replanted, and environmental laws were enforced. The result? Over 40% of the Dominican Republic remains forested, allowing the land to sustain its people. The consequences of these choices are profound. Haiti, with its degraded environment, struggles with food shortages, economic hardship, and vulnerability to natural disasters. When hurricanes strike, floods devastate the land, washing away the little topsoil that remains. In contrast, the Dominican Republic, with its protected forests, faces fewer such disasters and maintains a stronger economy. Why did these two nations, sharing the same island, take such different paths? The answer lies in political will, governance, and long-term vision. While Haiti's governments failed to implement environmental protections, the Dominican Republic's leaders made conscious efforts to invest in sustainability. Haiti's story is one of warning, a lesson in how deforestation and resource mismanagement can push a nation into crisis. The Dominican Republic's story is one of hope, proof that good policies can prevent collapse. The fate of Haiti is not sealed, nor is the Dominican Republic's success guaranteed. But the lesson of Hispaniola is clear. The environment shapes a nation's future, and the choices made today determine survival or ruin. China, the giant awakens. Chapter 13 examines how China's rapid industrialization and economic expansion have led to severe environmental degradation, including deforestation, water shortages, air pollution, and soil depletion, while also exploring the government's efforts to reverse ecological damage and achieve sustainable growth. For centuries, China was a land of dynasties and emperors, vast and powerful, yet largely agrarian. But in just a few decades, it transformed into an industrial giant, its cities swelling, its economy booming, and its people lifted from poverty at an unprecedented scale. Yet this rise came at cost. The very land that sustained China for millennia now groans under the weight of progress. Deforestation, water shortages, soil depletion, and toxic air threaten to undo the very success that propelled China forward. The scale of China's growth is staggering. Once a nation of rice paddies and small villages, it is now home to megacities, sprawling factories, and the world's largest population. The hunger for progress meant forests were cleared, rivers were dammed, and land was exhausted to fuel an economic explosion. But as skyscrapers soared, the environment suffered. The land paid the price. Centuries of intensive farming drained the soil of nutrients, leaving vast regions barren. Expanding deserts swallowed farmland, forcing millions to migrate. The Yellow River, once the lifeblood of Chinese civilization, now runs dry for months at a time, overused and overexploited. Air pollution, thick as fog, chokes major cities, with smog levels often surpassing hazardous limits. The country's once mighty rivers carry industrial waste, poisoning water supplies for millions. Yet, despite the damage, China is not following the path of total collapse. Unlike past civilizations that ignored warning signs, China is actively trying to reverse its environmental destruction. The government has launched ambitious reforestation programs, planting billions of trees in an attempt to halt desertification. Renewable energy projects, solar, wind, and hydro, are expanding at record rates, making China a global leader in green technology. Massive investments in water conservation and pollution control signal an awareness that survival depends on adaptation. But the question remains, is it enough? Can a nation of 1.4 billion people grow sustainably, or will environmental degradation outpace reform? The lessons of history loom large. Progress that ignores ecological limits eventually leads to disaster. China has chosen to act, but whether it can truly alter its trajectory before crisis sets in remains uncertain. China's rise is a story of ambition, power, and resilience. But its future will be determined not just by economic success, but by its ability to reconcile growth with the limits of the natural world. Will the giant awaken in time? Australia's Challenges explores how Australia's fragile environment, including its reliance on scarce water resources, susceptibility to soil degradation, and vulnerability to climate change, presents ongoing challenges that threaten its long-term sustainability despite its modern economy and technological advancements. Australia is a land of extremes, vast deserts, ancient forests, and a rugged coastline stretching beyond the horizon. From the air, it seems limitless, a continent rich in space and resources. Yet beneath this illusion of abundance lies a fragile reality. Water is scarce, the soil is delicate, and the climate is harsh. For tens of thousands of years, the indigenous peoples of Australia lived in harmony with this land, adapting to its challenges. But when European settlers arrived, they imposed an entirely different way of life, one that often clashed with the land's natural limits. Today, Australia, a modern and prosperous nation, faces the same threats that have undone civilizations before it: soil depletion, water scarcity, deforestation, and climate instability. Australia's greatest challenge is water, or the lack of it. Most of the continent is arid or semi-arid, with long, punishing droughts that can last for years. The rivers are few, and the interior is dominated by dry plains that cannot support dense populations. Despite this, modern agriculture has pushed deep into fragile regions, relying on massive irrigation projects that drain the limited water supply. The Murray-Darling Basin, Australia's most important agricultural region, is in crisis. Its rivers overused, its water reserves shrinking. Groundwater, once thought to be an endless resource, is now rapidly depleting. The land itself is ancient and exhausted. Unlike Europe or North America, where glaciation renewed the soil, Australia's land has been stable for millions of years, leaving it thin, nutrient-poor, and easily eroded. Intensive farming has stripped the soil further, leading to desertification. Deforestation has made matters worse, removing the trees that once stabilized the land and retained moisture. Where once there were vast forests, now there are dry, eroded plains. Climate change is amplifying these pressures. Bushfires, once a natural part of the ecosystem, now burn with greater intensity, destroying homes, farmland, and entire communities. Rising temperatures threaten both agriculture and the delicate balance of Australia's fragile ecosystems. Coastal cities like Sydney and Melbourne, home to most of the population, face rising sea levels and increasingly severe storms. Yet Australia is not blind to these threats. Efforts to conserve water, restore forests, and develop sustainable farming are underway. Scientists and policymakers recognize the dangers, and the country has invested heavily in renewable energy, particularly solar and wind power. But the question remains, will Australia act fast enough? The fate of Australia is a test of whether a wealthy, technologically advanced nation can overcome its environmental limits before reaching a breaking point. History has shown that civilizations that push their land too hard eventually collapse. Australia, with all its knowledge and resources, has the opportunity to choose a different path. But as the land dries, the rivers shrink, and the fires burn, time is running out. Now we are into the final part. Part 4 of Collapse, titled Practical Lessons, examines how businesses, governments, and societies can learn from past collapses, emphasizing the importance of sustainable environmental policies, corporate responsibility, and global cooperation to avoid repeating history's mistakes. Let's explore businesses and the environment in Chapter 15. In the modern world, corporations shape landscapes as much as governments do. From the vast plantations of agribusiness to the towering smokestacks of industry, the choices made by businesses determine the fate of forests, rivers, and even the air we breathe. Yet history warns us, when businesses exploit resources without restraint, collapse often follows. Some companies recognize this truth and adapt, while others, blinded by short-term profit, accelerate destruction. Will businesses choose sustainability, or will they drive us toward disaster? Throughout history, societies have fallen because they overexploited their environment. The deforested hills of Easter Island, the barren fields of the Maya, the depleted pastures of Norse Greenland, each collapse was driven, in part, by the failure to manage resources wisely. Today, corporations stand in a similar position. They have the power to protect the environment or to destroy it at unprecedented speed. Some industries have ignored the warnings. Logging companies have razed ancient forests, replacing biodiversity with monoculture plantations. Mining operations have polluted rivers, leaving toxic scars on the land. Industrial farms have stripped soil of nutrients, relying on chemical fertilizers to mask the decline. In pursuit of profit, these businesses treat nature as an infinite bank account, withdrawing resources without concern for the long-term cost. But others have learned from history. In some industries, sustainability is no longer just an ethical choice, it's a matter of survival. Fisheries, after decades of overfishing, have begun adopting sustainable practices, realizing that protecting fish stocks today means having an industry tomorrow. Timber companies in Scandinavia have pioneered responsible forestry, ensuring that trees are planted faster than they are cut. Even oil companies, long resistant to change, are investing in renewable energy, sensing the economic shift toward a post-carbon world. Government regulations also play a role. Countries with strong environmental policies often force businesses to adopt sustainable practices, proving that profit and preservation can coexist. In contrast, weak governance leads to reckless exploitation, where short-term gains for a few outweigh the long-term well-being of many. The lesson is clear. Businesses can be part of the solution or part of the problem. Those that fail to adapt will eventually collapse, just as civilizations that ignored their environment have in the past. But those that invest in sustainability, that recognize the limits of nature, will not only survive, they will thrive in a world that increasingly demands responsibility. The future of our planet will not be decided only by governments or scientists. It will be shaped by boardrooms, supply chains, and the decisions made in corporate offices. Will businesses repeat the mistakes of past, or will they help build a future where humanity and nature coexist? The world is a polder. What does it all mean to us today? Chapter 16 draws lessons from past societal collapses and applies them to the modern world, emphasizing that our survival depends on recognizing environmental limits, making sustainable choices, and acting before irreversible damage occurs. History has left us warnings. The ruins of collapsed civilizations, Easter Island, the Maya cities, Norse Greenland, are not just remnants of the past. They are mirrors reflecting our own choices, our own vulnerabilities. We stand at a crossroads, facing the same fundamental challenges that once doomed societies before us: environmental destruction, resource depletion, climate instability, and unsustainable growth. But unlike those past civilizations, we have something they did not: their stories as cautionary lessons. Jared Diamond compares our modern world to a polder, a term from the Netherlands referring to reclaimed land protected by dikes. The Dutch, living below sea level, understand that survival depends on constant vigilance. If they neglect their dikes, the sea will reclaim the land. This is our world today, one where we must actively maintain the balance or face collapse. The threats are real. Forests vanish at alarming rates. Fisheries collapse under relentless exploitation. Climate change intensifies droughts, storms, and rising seas. We are extracting resources faster than nature can replenish them, just as past societies did before they fell. But unlike the isolated peoples of Easter Island or the Anasazi, we are no longer bound by geography. We live in a globalized world where the collapse of one region can send ripples across the planet. Yet there is hope. Some societies, like Japan and Tokopia, chose sustainability over destruction. Modern nations have the ability to do the same. The question is whether we will act before the damage becomes irreversible. Solutions exist. Strong governance, corporate responsibility, sustainable agriculture, and renewable energy all offer paths forward. The biggest challenge is not the lack of technology. It is the will to change. Throughout history, civilizations that failed to recognize their limits perished. Those that adapted survived. The choice is ours. Will we learn from history, or will we repeat it? The world, like a polder, will endure only if we choose to maintain it. If we fail, there will be no second chance. Finalizing collapse, Jared emphasizes, nothing is inevitable. The past is filled with the ruins of civilizations that once stood tall, their people confident in their own endurance, until the land beneath them gave way. Easter Island's forests, the Anasazi's canyons, the Maya's temples, Norse Greenland's farms, all tell the same story. Societies that fail to recognize their limits pay the price. Their collapses may seem distant, but they hold a stark warning. We are not immune to the same fate. Yet, history does not predict the future. It only offers lessons. Nothing is inevitable. Just as some societies crumbled under their own weight, others adapted, made difficult choices, and survived. Japan, Tokopia, and the Dominican Republic prove that collapse is not the only path. The world today, for all its complexity, still faces the same fundamental choices: sustainability or destruction, action or complacency. Unlike past civilizations, we have something they did not: the ability to learn from their mistakes before it's too late. We are no longer isolated tribes or kingdoms unaware of what is happening beyond our borders. We live in a globalized world, interconnected by trade, technology, and knowledge. Our survival depends not just on individual nations, but on collective action. The future will not be determined by fate, it will be shaped by the decisions we make now. Will we repeat history, exhausting our resources and ignoring the warning signs? Or will we take a different path, one that ensures survival beyond the next few generations? The ruins of past civilizations whisper their warnings. The choice is ours to make. As we close this journey through collapse, we invite you to reflect on these ideas and consider how history continues to shape the world today. Thank you for your time and thoughtful engagement. If you have any reflections, insights, or topics you'd like to explore further, we'd love to hear from you. We look forward to seeing you again for our next book discussion. If you enjoyed this content, your support through a subscription and a like is truly appreciated. We will see you soon with the next book.